September, and the traditional date for the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. This is one of the great races on the Formula One calendar, full of history and with an enthusiastic crowd, almost all of whom have come to worship Ferrari. But this car and this man looked set to spoil the crowd's weekend. The Lotus 79, Mario Andretti and Ronnie Peterson had dominated the season and looked good for a win here too. Other drivers and teams, like Patrick Tambay and McLaren, had not given up hope. However, the McLaren M26 and most of the cars lined up in front of the pits were now outdated. The teams were counting on their designers to play catch-up in order to challenge JPS Lotus and its mould-breaking wing cars. Clay Regazzoni was one of the few drivers who had a former wing car, but his shadow team had lost the car's designer and had been embroiled in legal arguments for much of the year. There was no way it could challenge Lotus. As for Colin Chapman and his drivers, they had every reason to play the jokers in the pack. Emerson Fittipaldi's Coppice car was improving steadily, but the arrival of the Lotus had raised the bar. Brabham had attempted to catch up with the fan car, but the establishment's response had been merely, "Nice try." McLaren had more on their plate than an outdated car. James Hunt had lost impetus this year, and his contract would not be renewed for 1979. His replacement would be Ronnie Peterson, possibly paired with a young driver like Brazil's Nelson Piquet or Italy's Bruno Giacomelli. For Mario Andretti, preparing to go out for practice, the most important consideration was the world title. A win here and in the next race in America would guarantee the championship, even if Peterson finished his usual second in both races. Retirement in any of the remaining 3 events could see the title going down to the wire in Canada. The permutations must have been tumbling through his mind. Patrick Tambay now knew that his teammate at McLaren next year would be Ronnie Peterson. The news had been announced a week ago. The Frenchman might have hoped that he would be promoted when Hunt, who was rumoured to be going to Wolff, left, but as a realist, he knew Peterson would have to be number 1. Many people were of the opinion that Ronnie was only finishing second in the Lotus because of team orders, and he was a natural leader for any team he joined, ready to challenge the top drivers at Ferrari, Brabham, and yes, Lotus. For Ronnie, the move to McLaren would be a challenge, and one that he would relish. But now was the time to stop thinking about the future and concentrate on the job in hand, practice. Brett Lunger's McLaren led the cars out of the pits, followed by Brambilla, G-Max, an Italian privateer who failed to qualify, Piquet, Patrese, Rabac, Giacomelli, Fittipaldi, Jones, Scheckter, Villeneuve, Daly, Blake-Molen, Hunt, Tambay, Andretti, Lafitte and Pironi. Niki Lauda was 4th on the grid, and between him and Andretti on pole were 2 newcomers to the front 2 rows. Villeneuve had set 2nd fastest time, and in 3rd place was Jabouille in the Renault. The Canadian had captured the imagination of the fans by qualifying no less than 9 places ahead of Reutemann. As the mechanics topped up his fuel tank, it was allowed in 1978, the crowd must have been thinking that maybe he could challenge the all-conquering Lotus and Andretti. Jones was 6th fastest and alongside Peterson on the 3rd row. Watson was 8th, on the 4th row alongside Scheckter. Reutemann languished back on row 6, and behind him was Fittipaldi. As the field rolled round from the sighting lap, it seemed that the front row had hardly stopped before the starting signal was given. The premature start and a dash by Patrese down the pit side of the track were two of the reasons given for the multiple collision that occurred on the run into the first chicane. Hunt spun, and the ensuing crash involved 5 other cars, including that of Peterson, who went head-on into the barriers. His car burst into flames, and Hunt bravely went into the fire to drag Ronnie out, his legs badly injured. The race was stopped, and medical personnel started to work on the Swede as all around shocked drivers and track personnel tried to come to terms with what had happened. There was little they could do to help one of their most valued colleagues. That was a job for experts. Some stood in dismay and bewilderment. Some looked for a way to help. For the drivers who'd been involved, the best thing to do was to make their way back to the pits and their teams. A shocked Mario Andretti, who'd been ahead of the accident and was stopped with the rest of the front runners as they completed their first lap, was heading back to the pits when he saw a doctor. He urged him to go to his teammates' help. Niki Lauda was also among the leading group that had come round to see the scene of carnage ahead of them. He was surrounded by press as he returned to his car in the pits. Eventually, Peterson was taken to hospital, where his injuries were judged to be serious but not life-threatening. Preparations were made to restart the race. But it wasn't really a race. Nobody had the heart for it, and it ended as a fiasco. But worse was to come. That night, Ronnie Peterson died. Not from his injuries, but on the operating table of a Milan hospital. The show went on, but Formula One went into mourning.